Hello, my name is Eric Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'll be talking about differences are superficial. I think people in general, even spiritual seekers, make a big deal of differences and become fixated on it. They're overly attached to difference. And this is counterproductive when we're talking about non-duality. Non-duality, there is no other, no separation, no second. You could say figuratively, it's one thing. There's just oneness. And so, any and all difference is on the surface. It's superficial. It's on the face. It is like if you took a coin and somebody might become very fixated on the differences between the heads and tails and make a big deal of how the heads and tails are very, very different. But it's one coin. What's really the difference? It's just the surface. Just the face is different. Each coin face varies. But it's one coin. It doesn't really matter. In this way, the self is all there is. The self alone exists. But there is still variation in pattern and form. And the jnani, or the awakened one, or enlightened one, can still recognize differences in pattern and form. Such a one would never confuse a chair for a table, or a cat for a dog. Variation and difference can be recognized. But the differences are superficial. They're not significant. They don't particularly matter. What's significant is there's just the self. It's all self. If the face is slightly different than another face, it doesn't particularly matter. Because it's all self in the end. Not even in the end, currently. In a prior video, I talked about gold as an analogy for Brahman. And let's say you had a gold fork, gold spoon, and gold knife, each made with equal amounts of gold. Well, what's the difference between these? You can make a big deal out of the differences between these three things. But the differences are purely on the surface, on the face. They're all gold. You can melt down the spoon and make a knife out of it. And then you'd have two knives and a fork. It's just a superficial difference, not particularly significant. And so, as we look out upon the world, I think it's interesting to pay attention to our reactions and attachments to difference. And perhaps remind ourselves the differences are only on the face. The differences are not significant. They're superficial. They are just on the surface, but what's there is self. And in this way, we might perhaps see through or, work through the habit of fixating or creating differences and making a big deal of difference, to, in a way, practice de-emphasizing difference. And instead see the substance, the substratum, that it's one. Instead of making a big deal of heads and tails, recognize it's the coin. Instead of making a big deal of fork, knife, and spoon, recognize it's all gold. As you look at the various forms and patterns that you see, It's all self. It's just superficially, on the surface, differences in pattern and form. It's all self. And so, something to play with. But if you have any questions, comments, please post below. And until next time, thank you much.